Hello, everybody, and welcome into GC Live here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith and Jack Veltri coming at you here live on this Wednesday. We hope that you are all doing well. Jack, I hope you're doing well too. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Kendall. It's I thought today was going to be actually like a slow day in the South
You
Carolina.
texted that to me. You said it was going to be slow.
Yep. I texted you this morning. It was going to be slow. And then like an hour or two later, it just ends up being a little bit busier today, I would say the least. But other than that, I'm doing great, and I'm always happy to be on here with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one here today. We're going to talk a little bit about football because we've gone a couple of weeks without talking about it. So way too early predictions for the 2025 season are coming your way here today. We didn't think there would be a ton of baseball news, especially because I just joined Jack on the Sunday reset a couple of days ago. We talked about baseball for quite some time, so we weren't expecting anything crazy on the baseball front, but actually today we did get some news, a little bit of information about the weekend rotation for South Carolina's opening series next weekend against Sacred Heart. And Jack, you got what you wanted. Matthew Becker in that starting rotation. Pulmonary announced it earlier today. Becker will start game 2. Dylan will start game 1 to be announced for game 3.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I did get my wish because, I just think these guys are pitching the best. I mean, I'm glad to see that Pulmonary's rewarding guys that, weren't. I mean, Dylan Eskew was the only guy he really considered a front runner when we spoke to him on Media Day 2 weeks ago. I mean, Matthew Becker, he considered more of like a wild card pitcher that maybe could be back into the bullpen, close games out, go 3-4 innings, what have you. But I think they've both been pitching really good to where it's like you can't put either of them in the bullpen or anything. I mean, it just wouldn't have been practical. I mean, Becker's been solid ever since the fall. I mean, he had a fantastic fall, has been probably one of, if not the better pitchers in the preseason here. And then Dylan Eskew has improved drastically. I've loved his pitch mix. His cutter has been really sharp. I mean, just fooling guys like Ethan Petrie and Kennedy Jones, Nathan Hall. I mean, players like that. It's really impressive what he's been doing. Now, I know everyone's probably asking, where's Eli Jersenbeck? Why isn't he in the rotation? What's going on? Is he hurt? Something happened? Well, something has happened, and obviously it's just the fact that he hasn't pitched as good as the other guys. I mean, over his first 2 outings of the preseason, he just hasn't been as good as maybe we expect him to be, right? Like the Friday night guy you envision him to be. It's just his command hasn't really been there at times, and he's giving up some runs, which is leading to him getting hit around a little bit. Once he walks batters, the inning starts to get a little bit out of hand. So I think it's not like official yet that he's not going to be in the rotation. Like he'll have his chance this weekend. And same with a guy like Jake McCoy, who I thought has been very good at times this preseason. I was a little shocked that he didn't make the rotation in this initial, announcement that Pulmonary made. But again, that could change over the weekend here, and he makes it on Sunday. We'll see. But I think with Jake, it's also just he's got great stuff. He throws as hard as anyone on this team. He really can get outs. But it's also Paul brought up a good point today when he was on the morning show, with talking Gamecocks and whatnot. But anyway, with McCoy, it's just he's great for 2 to 3 innings. But then once things start to get a little bit dicey, it's just he's not exactly the same pitcher as he was before. Like you saw this over the weekend where he gave up a leadoff homer, then retired 9 of the next 10 batters, and then he gave up 2 homers to end his outing. So he's been really good at times, also struggled a little bit. I think ultimately what will happen, I think Jersenbeck makes the rotation ultimately. I think he's going to have a good outing this weekend. I think McCoy, you put him in the midweek spot to start the year and go from there. But it also wouldn't shock me if we see one of these other guys that maybe isn't getting talked about enough make the rotation. But again, it's not surprising to see Eskew and Becker at least be the frontline guys for now. Oh, Kendall, you're on mute.
I'm on mute.
It's okay.
I'm back. Okay, I muted myself because there were some construction noises going on behind me. Sorry about that, everybody.
You're good.
Embarrassing when that happens, but we're back. We're good. Here we go. You already answered my question before I even had the chance to ask you who you think that TBA starter could be on Sunday. Obviously, a couple names that could potentially be in the mix. And as you mentioned, South Carolina has another opportunity this weekend to just kind of sharpen up and get ready for that opening series next weekend at home at Founders Park. So I think some questions to be answered this weekend. Jack, are there any other questions that you think need to be answered this weekend for South Carolina ahead of their opening day and opening series?
Yeah, I think, one question that we spoke about on Sunday and I couldn't really give a great answer to it just because I don't really know how it's going to look. What does that bullpen look like? I mean, now that we kind of have an idea that Becker and Eskew, I mean, I figured Eskew wasn't going to be in the bullpen, at least not on the back end of it, maybe Becker. That takes him out of that spot as a potential closer. So who do you put back there to try to finish off games? Because like Paul had said when he was initially talking about using Matthew as like a hybrid guy, I mean, who is going to be that guy that you turn the ball over to get you the final 3 outs of the game? I mean, do you go with maybe a younger guy? Do you go with one of the older guys that transferred in? I mean, that's just one of the questions that I have that even right now I couldn't exactly tell you, just because the bullpen is it's so much harder to figure out who's going to pitch where, because you have so many starters that are vying for rotation spots that aren't going to make the rotation. And whether they're going to be long relievers, middle relievers, or they're at the back end of the bullpen closing out games or being setup men, that's a little harder to figure out. So that's probably my big question. And then also, I mean, I think now I have a better idea of it, but definitely at the start of the preseason, I was wondering who's going to step up around Petrie on this offense, who are going to be the guys that you can count on to definitely hit. And I think two interesting notes. Nolan Naraki in that interview Maneri did, he also mentioned that Nolan Naraki should be starting at second base for the Gamecocks this year, which in my scrimmage notes yesterday, after just watching the way Will Tippett's been playing this preseason, I think I said that he had been playing his way out of starting at second base. Like as soon as Naraki got healthy and could play the field again, which I would expect him to play the field a little bit this weekend since he's been taking some grounders during BP and whatnot over that way, it makes sense that Naraki's your guy at second base right now just because he's been swinging the bat pretty good and Tippett hasn't. It all comes down to competition and things could always change. But as for the lineup, I do think there are still a few guys I need to see do this consistently when the season begins. Like Talmadge Lucroy's one. He's been great in the fall, been pretty good in the preseason here. How is he going to do when the real season begins? Same with Kennedy Jones. Kennedy has probably been South Carolina, outside of Ethan Petrie, has been South Carolina's best hitter this preseason, I think, in my opinion. But can he be that guy that hits behind Petrie and does it well? That's a big void to fill when you lose Cole Messina. So you're going to need some thump behind Ethan in that lineup, assuming Ethan's hitting 3 and then someone like Kennedy is hitting 4. So, but I think this lineup overall is going to be a lot more balanced. You're going to have a lot more contact at the plate and less home run or strikeout. So again, I think that question is being answered, but I still need to see it in the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those questions that we are still trying to figure out answers to. And you will, obviously, as games start to come up in South Carolina, you actually get to see them play live in-game action. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like you can have all of these scrimmages. They're great. They're awesome. Seeing what happens. You can hear all that construction noise behind me.
That's okay.
It's not too loud.
We're working with what we got.
But seeing what happens, obviously in a live in-game situation is a little bit different than what you see in the preseason sometimes. So a lot of things that we still need to figure out about this team. But I think the one thing we can all agree on is that it does look like a very exciting group this year. And Jack, we talked about the bullpen pretty much in depth on Sunday when we had our Sunday reset show. So that should be interesting as well. And just a note, a lot of these guys, we talked about this on the show too. It's different, right? Being a closer versus being a middle reliever, whatever it might be, that preparation, getting ready to play those different roles in the bullpen for a team are certainly different. So you hope for some level of consistency with this group. Obviously, it's never going to be perfect. And it's like a puzzle. You're going to have to see what fits where at certain points of the year. People will have highs, they'll have lows. But for South Carolina, just trying to find some level of consistency. I think that's been something over the last few years that has been a certain struggle for the group. So trying to get that as early and as often as possible is the goal, I would imagine, for the South Carolina baseball team. We talked about about this a little bit on Sunday as well. And it appears like it's obviously you're looking for kind of a combination of this. You talked about some of those guys that might be able to play a little bit more of that kind of small ball feel, but then you've got guys like Ethan on your team that can obviously hit the long ball and hit it very well, Jack.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And yeah, I mean, look, they're going to hit some homers this year. That is with any college baseball team. Like Ethan Petrie is probably going to get his 20 this year. And I think Kennedy Jones could be a guy that gets about 10, maybe 10 to 15, if not a few more, if things kind of go his way and he's having a great year. But I think you're also going to have a lot of contact bats in this lineup. Like, honestly, I think Nathan Hall, Henry Kazmar, that makes up the top of your order. Those are contact bats. Middle of your order, Talmadge LeCroy, who I forgot to mention. We got a question here. I'll go right back to the other question in a second. That is the catcher position still up in the air. Well, Maneri, that's the other thing Maneri mentioned is that Talmadge is going to be the starting catcher, and Max Coffer and Ryan Bakes will duke it out for the backup duties. And I'm not surprised by that. Talmadge has had a great preseason here, but don't sleep on Max Coffer. I wasn't very high on him, honestly, coming into the year, but I think his offense has been a lot better than most have expected, and he hasn't been that bad behind the plate, I don't think. So we'll see how that ends up going. But anyway, I think, middle of your order with Talmadge, guys like that, you're going to have a lot of contact bats. And then obviously at the bottom of the order, we'll see how it shakes out. But I think this is going to be a predominantly contact-oriented lineup. They will hit some homers for sure outside of your main sluggers in there. But I think we're going to see a lot of little things this team does right to win games, moving runners over. We'll see how much they bunt, but I think you're definitely going to see them try to put some runs across outside of just hitting home runs.
Well, also today, I guess in other baseball news that we should probably talk about before we move on to our way too early 2025 football predictions is the fact that South Carolina wasn't given a whole lot of love when it came to the predicted order of finish in the SEC, coming in 14th for the predicted finish. And I think that might be kind of giving the Gamecocks a little bit of an underdog situation here. I don't know if that's an entirely fair assessment. What do you think, Jack?
So there are two ways to look at this. I think number one, you have to consider the fact that the SEC is the premier conference in college baseball. And I think people might get a little annoyed when I say this or roll their eyes, but I think it might be a little bit like what we're seeing in men's basketball right now, where not saying South Carolina is going to be bottom of the barrel this year in baseball, but I think this is going to be a conference that, like years past, 4 teams from the SEC made it to Omaha last year, and 2 of them were battling it out for the College World Series trophy. You're going to see the SEC, I think, maybe get double-digit bids to get into the NCAA tournament this year. And I think this is, as usual, it's going to be a conference that is a dogfight all the way down going into Hoover. Like, South Carolina's got their work cut out for them, and it's easy to put teams like Texas A&M, Tennessee, both teams that just made it to Omaha in the finals last year, Arkansas, LSU, teams like that, Florida. It's easy to put those teams so high up because you already know what they're all about. You know that they win year in and year out. Like, I saw a stat the other day, just reading around, that Florida, since Kevin O'Sullivan's been the head coach out in Gainesville, Florida's made it to Omaha nearly 50% of the time. That's insane. And for South Carolina, it's not that they can't do that or they can't make it far. It's just there's so many questions in the eyes of people that don't watch this team every single day like we do. Like, how's Paul Maneri going to do in his first season at South Carolina? He hasn't coached since 2021. How's that going to look? How's the pitching going to shake out? How is your offense going to be outside of Ethan Petrie? These are all questions that I'm assuming are why you see South Carolina in 14th in the preseason poll. Now, I don't think that's going to end up being the case. I think this team is miles better than Ole Miss and Missouri, who are the only teams behind South Carolina. And I think the Gamecocks are probably, I don't want to say top 5 in the conference by any means, because those are really good teams up there, but they're certainly at least in the middle of the pack in this. I think by the end of the year, you're going to see them in the middle of the standings, potentially fighting for a hosting bid, if not getting a spot to host in the NCAA tournament for regional play. So I think if you're listening and you're worried about the preseason poll, which I wouldn't recommend even really worrying about, it's just people and coaches just voting on it. I think South Carolina is going to definitely surprise some people considering they are picked so low in the preseason. And also in all these rankings and stuff, South Carolina is like nowhere to be found in any top 25. So the SEC is definitely loaded, yes, but South Carolina is going to have their chance to go up against all these teams and potentially, win some of these series and prove people wrong.
Utilize it as motivation 100%. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see that. I mean, obviously in a conference like the SEC, I didn't necessarily expect South Carolina, like you said, to be top 5, but I wasn't expecting them to be 14 either. But yes, as we just mentioned, so many questions about this team that I think South Carolina will answer. And I think they will answer them well, quite frankly, based off what we've seen so far in the preseason. But again, we're going to have to wait for all of that to shake out and get into some live game action before we can 100% say whether or not these predictions about South Carolina could end up being true. And there you have it. Yeah, you just got to make them believers. That's 100% what it is. Again, use that as motivation. I think, to kind of segue into our conversation about football, we've seen this happen with football over the last few years. I mean, the predicted wins for South Carolina seem like they're never really falling in line with what maybe the fans that are watching this team on a regular basis think could happen with the team. So we're going to talk about some of those wins that we think could come the Gamecocks' way in 2025. But Jack, before we do that, let's give a shout out to our presenting sponsor here on the show.
Yep. So right above us here, as usual, if you're watching live right now or if you're listening later on podcast format, I'm talking about our sponsor, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market to buy a home or you need help with your mortgage, but you have no idea where to begin, I got good news for you. Clint can help you out. He's been in the mortgage industry for more than 20 years, and he's a lifelong Gamecock fan, and he's also a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central. Again, you'll see him if you're watching live right above us here on screen as usual. So he'll take you through the process step by step and definitely help you out. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597, or you can go to clinthammond.com.
Perfect. Yeah, always a huge shout out for Clint. He is fantastic. We appreciate all of his support here on Gamecock Central. All right, Jack, like I said, we went a couple of weeks without talking about football. So, of course, we have to talk about some Gamecock football. It's time already, which it's crazy. I mean, I feel like time will go by fast. We're coming up on our last football game, not college football, but just football in general, including the NFL this upcoming weekend. I'm curious, before we get into talking about South Carolina, your thoughts on the Super Bowl.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think KC might three-peat. I hate saying that. I definitely do. I just think they're that team of destiny. Like, they are so good when it matters most. And I think the Eagles are very solid too. But I mean, so much is on the line this weekend. I'm really thinking this is going to be. It always seems to be, but I think it's going to be a really all-time classic type of game, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. So I think I got to roll with the Chiefs this weekend. But what about you?
I do not care who wins.
Neither do I, honestly.
I don't care. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm just going to watch it, and hopefully it's a good game, and I'm going to enjoy the food, and I'm going to enjoy the time with everybody that's around, and just enjoy the last football game for a little while, at least until the college season starts. So, yeah, I don't care who wins. I really don't have a prediction. I guess if I had to pick, I would pick the Eagles. I'm just going to go with the Eagles because Saquon helped carry my fantasy football team to victory. So I have to give a shout out to Saquon as the general manager of my fantasy football team. I appreciate him. I didn't have anybody from the Chiefs on my team. So let's go with the Eagles. Just for the sake of Saquon Barkley, who has had an absolutely unbelievable season. And like, out to him. I mean, what a cool situation for him to just come from what had happened and prove everybody wrong and just have an unbelievable season. Love that for him. So yeah, big Saquon fan, and I hope that it's a great game. And I know the Gamecock fans won't want to hear it, but here in Charlotte, I went to school with Will Shipley, who actually went to Clemson. He scored his first touchdown last week. He's awesome. Family's a member of my church. His brother was my grade. Great family. So would love that for them, obviously, as well. But Jack, let's talk some more football, some college football. and it's about the South Carolina Gamecocks, obviously, because this is GC Live. We're going to give our predictions very, very early for the 2025 season. Just kind of go through the schedule, talk about where we're at. We'll probably do this a million other times between now and when the season actually starts for South Carolina. But just overall, before we get into these games, Jack, what are your expectations? Based on what we know now, of course, things could change. People could transfer. South Carolina could pick up more guys, whatever it might be. But based on what we know now about the team, what are your overall expectations in 2025 for South Carolina football?
I think you should feel good about this team for sure. I think they could definitely be very, very solid again this year. But I don't know. I mean, I think it all comes down to, number one, how do these transfers and new players you brought in, how did they pan out? Because so much of South Carolina's success in 2024, while we want to look at Lenore Sellers and guys like Dylan Stewart and stuff and all these returning players you brought back, so much of your success was predicated on the fact of your incoming guys making an impact, like Kyle Kennard, Demetrius Knight, players like that on defense that were real standouts for you this past season. On offense, Rocket Sanders, Torselli Simpkins, Kamar Bell. I mean, you were very solid this season for obvious reasons, but also for the fact of you hit on so many of your transfers that you picked up out of the portal. So you need to do that again, I think, to have success this year. And I think when you mention like receivers and stuff, that's actually one of my predictions. I think we're going to see freshman receivers on this team not only just play meaningful snaps, but make an impact this year. Like you could see a guy like Donovan Murph, who just signed officially today at Irmo. And then you also have guys like Jordan Gidron and Malik Clark and so many other incoming receivers on this team that I think over the course of the spring, first off, you're going to see these guys get a lot of action, I would imagine. We'll see how it looks in the spring game too. And then reevaluate, see if you need to go pick up another receiver, which ultimately I think you will go get another guy in the portal. But that does not mean that you're not going to see those guys definitely step up in that room. So again, a lot of this past season, came down to the fact that you hit on a lot of portal pickups. If you do that again and you combine that with the guys you have returning and you envision them being better than they were in 2024, you have the makings of a college football playoff team.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so exciting what this group already has and what they could potentially pick up. We feel like South Carolina did a pretty good job in the portal. What'd you give them, a B+, Jack?
I think so. I think that's fair from the portal standpoint. Okay. Again, it's just because we don't know for sure what it's going to look like. I think that's a fair and safe grade. And then by season's end next year, when we're talking about how everything went in 2025, we'll talk a lot about those grades and see if they're accurate.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the schedule and kind of you give your first thoughts. When I say a game, you let me know what you think is going to happen in that game. So South Carolina will kick off their season in the Aflac kickoff game on August 31st. This game in Atlanta, Georgia against Virginia Tech. An exciting one for Shane Beamer specifically, obviously with all of the family history, his dad coaching at VT. So this should be an exciting one, a neutral site game to kick off the year for South Carolina, and a neutral site game that is not at Bank of America Stadium. I feel like anytime South Carolina plays neutral site outside of a bowl game, it's always in Charlotte. This one in Atlanta, Georgia. What do you think, Jack?
I think South Carolina is going to win this game. I mean, like, I don't think it's going to be much of a shock if that is the case. Like, Virginia Tech, it's a cool story that Shane's getting to go up against his alma mater, where his dad was a legendary head coach for years and years and years. But Virginia Tech isn't what they used to be. Like, since Brent Pry took over as head coach in 2022, I mean, this is a program that has struggled. I mean, they're coming off a 6th and 7th season, coincidentally losing in the Duke's Mayo Bowl nearby in Charlotte. So there you go, fun fact. But I think he's got to be on the hot seat this year, right? If you're the Hokies, like if you're not having a good year, probably going to can him. And I think this is going to be South Carolina's time to kind of be in the spotlight. I know they're not the only game on that Sunday with Notre Dame, Miami later that day. But I think this is South Carolina's chance to really show what they can do right out of the gate to a large audience watching, and I think they're going to win that game.
Yeah, it should be a good one to kick off the year. Next up, South Carolina, their home opener against South Carolina State. What do you got?
All right, South Carolina's going to win this game, but like don't get it twisted. Like SC State had a good year last year, making it. I believe they made it all the way to the Celebration Bowl, which is pretty cool for them. But I think with South Carolina, like this is a game that they're going to end up winning by a large margin. And I was right; they did go to the Celebration Bowl and lost 28-7 to Jackson State last year. So I think South Carolina is going to win this game, no problem. Not much else to be really said.
All right, next on the list, this one is on September 13th, once again at home in Columbia at Williams-Brice Stadium. South Carolina against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is coming off of a pretty good season for Vandy, so they're going to play South Carolina at home. Obviously, for South Carolina, this is a must-win to kick off your SEC slate.
This will be the first real test, I think, to see what your defense can do, because not saying Virginia Tech and SC State are not challenges in their own way, but Vandy with Diego Pavia coming back, South Carolina handled him pretty well, I think, for the most part when the Gamecocks went out to Nashville for the 2024 season. I think if you are able to handle him and not let him run around in the pocket and do what he does best, making plays happen, kind of like Lenore Sellers does, then you should win this game, I think, no problem at home. I think I don't know what to expect out of Vanderbilt this year, honestly. I think they're going to be right in the mix of being where they were this past season again, but I think this game being at home for South Carolina, SEC opener, there's no excuse to lose to Vanderbilt. I think South Carolina is going to be 3-0 after that game.
Yeah, that wouldn't exactly set a solid tone going into the rest of SEC play. So if you're South Carolina, the reason why I call it a must win, obviously, because you want to start things off on a good note. And as you continue down the schedule, you notice a trend of how it just continues to get more and more and more difficult. And we'll kind of talk about the layout of the schedule once we go through the rest of the games. But next up, they're on the road, the Gamecocks, to the other Columbia. This one, though, in Missouri, taking on the Missouri Tigers. This is on September 20th. Finally, this past season, South Carolina was able to rid itself of the problems that it's had with Missouri in the past. Does the trend continue this year?
This is a really tricky game that I feel like I know since I've been talking about the schedule and stuff, I've talked about, and we'll get to these other road games later on, but I've talked about Missouri not as much as these other road games in terms of difficulty. This is one that South Carolina definitely could get stumped. I'm not sure what to expect with Missouri no longer having Brady Cook and Luther Burden and all that. I think South Carolina wins this game, but it is going to be very close. And Missouri's always seemingly right in the thick of things. Even though they're not, they didn't make the playoff this past year, they still won 10 games and stuff. So I think it's going to be tricky. It's going to come down to the wire. Someone's going to have to make a play. I think South Carolina does and moves to 4-0.
Don't say it's going to come down to the wire. That's just stressful.
Doesn't it always, though? Doesn't it always?
Season, oh my goodness, that game was stressful, but probably one of my favorite wins of the year for South Carolina. We talked about that a few weeks ago, just some of the best moments of the season. I feel like that Missouri win in 2024 was definitely one of my favorites. All right, next up after Missouri, the 27th of September, back at home once again against Kentucky.
I wish I had my sunglasses nearby, but I left them in the car for this. Now, I think Kentucky is. I don't think Kentucky's very good. I don't think they're very good. They didn't have a good season this year. I'm not very confident in them next year. I honestly think we're getting to a point where Mark Stoops, Kentucky's going to have to consider him, being fired at some point. I think next year, and considering this is at home for South Carolina, I think we'll know a lot about this team and what they're going to look like by the 5th week of the season. And you got to bye a week after. I think South Carolina is going to win this game, and I don't think it's going to be necessarily as close as the Missouri game was. So you're 5-0 going into your first bye week, and you're through the first month of the year. That would be very impressive, and I think I've seen a lot of people think that should ultimately be the case going into October.
Yeah, and obviously the goal for South Carolina, especially as the schedule continues to get more and more difficult, because when you look at the next game that is on the schedule for South Carolina, it's on October 11th. This one's tough. You go to Baton Rouge to take on LSU on the road.
I would be confident that the fact this is coming off a bye week, it should help South Carolina in theory. Then again, I remember watching this team the week after the bye week going into the Ole Miss game, And they played their worst game of the year.
Don't bring that up.
I know. Bad juju. I know. But look,
What's last year's last year?
Last year, and Shane and the staff and everyone's going to learn from it, right? That's what you hope. However, this is quite possibly, if it all lines up, I think this is going to be a night game in Death Valley. That is as tough as it gets. I think South Carolina loses this game. I think it's a really competitive game, just like it was when LSU came to town this past year. But I think South Carolina is going to drop some of these tough road games that they have coming up in the latter half of the season. And I think LSU is pretty good. I think Brian Kelly is I don't want to say he's coaching for his job, but something's got to improve there. You got to be better than where you are with your LSU right now. And I think with Garrett Nussmeier back, I think LSU is going to be able to win this game at home under the lights.
Well, I am excited about that matchup, specifically the Nussmeier-Sellers matchup. Both of their names have been brought up in potential Heisman predictions for the upcoming season, so I think that should be a good one from a quarterback standpoint. Just those two going head-to-head will be exciting, but not an easy place to play at all. One of the more daunting places in the SEC to go and play on the road. So South Carolina will certainly have a tough task with that one. I think that's going to be one we circle on the calendar as we get closer and closer to the season, and obviously we'll talk about it a lot more. But yeah, that's your first predicted loss for South Carolina. Yeah, so there we go. We're heading into Oklahoma next, and this is back home in Columbia.
The benefit for this game for South Carolina is, and it was just like this last year, where Oklahoma has to play Texas the week before, and win or lose that game, I fully expect Texas to win that game, no problem. I think it's going to create a lot of emotions for Oklahoma. They're going to be so set on that game. And then guess what? They got to go to Columbia, South Carolina for the first time since joining the SEC. And we remember how this game went last year. It was so much about what the defense did in that game. But I think this is going to be a game maybe where your offense ends up stealing the show. I think this is going to potentially be – I'll make a really bold prediction if you want it. I think I would not be shocked if this is the game that Oklahoma loses and Brent Venables gets fired. I'm gonna be honest. It would not shock me just because you look at Oklahoma's schedule up to that point. They got Michigan at home in week 2. They play Auburn, and I think Auburn should be a little bit improved. And then you get Texas. I mean, you could potentially have 3 losses going into that October 18th game, and then the schedule is daunting from there with Ole Miss, Tennessee, Bama, Missouri, LSU. That's for Oklahoma. I think even if Venables doesn't get fired after this game, I think it's going to be coming after that because I think South Carolina is going to win this game. And I think it leads to Oklahoma needing to make some changes relatively soon thereafter.
Well, similarly to last season, you get a couple of the teams kind of grouped up in not the same order, but like a similar kind of timeline around the same time. After South Carolina plays Oklahoma, they've got Alabama for homecoming in Columbia. Why is this homecoming? I guess there's not a lot of other great options.
I don't know. I've seen people say like, oh, it's so disrespectful to put them on the home game. I've never understood that. Like maybe I'm missing something, but like, I mean, it's just homecoming. Like, I mean, maybe I'm off my mark on that. But I think this is going to be, again, I think these are all going to be really good games, like I've been saying. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect out of Alabama, to be honest, because, like, are they going to be that much better than they were? Well, honestly, they weren't even really that great this season. Like, are they going to be that much worse or a little bit better? I think Alabama's got to be better this year. However, there's just so many questions I have about the Crimson Tide to where, like, I know South Carolina's got their questions, but, you know, this is a game that South Carolina's going to really want to get after losing last year. And like Big Red says here, I think this game would be under the lights. I think South Carolina wins this game. It would be really tight, I think, going down to the wire. But again, I like Lenore-Sellers in these matchups where the game really matters. We saw it this year time and time again. And I think we see it again next year when Alabama comes to town. So give me South Carolina to win that game. And I believe that puts them – no, wait, they'd already be at bowl eligibility by that point. So they'd be 7-1.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Give Jack South Carolina in the game against Alabama. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we've seen it with Lenore-Sellers. He's a gamer. Like in those high-pressure situations, he comes through for the Gamecocks more often than not. All right, next up, speaking of redemption games, you mentioned South Carolina wants a little redemption with Alabama. They're definitely going to want some redemption with the next opponent on the schedule. We're looking at Ole Miss on November 1st, this one in Oxford, Mississippi.
if you want to make the playoff, this is the game you have to win, I think, to get there. Like, I just think South Carolina, if my predictions are correct, which I don't know if they're going to be, it could be way off the mark, but let's say they really realistically are 7-1 going into this game. You have to win this game. There is no excuse to lose this game if you want to get to the playoff. Like, if you're actually a contender, you'll win this game. Ole Miss is losing some pieces. South Carolina has to go to Oxford. I don't know. These road games are so tricky at the end of the year. You know what, though? I was originally going to pick them to lose this game. I think they're going to win this game. I just think there's this game is going to be eating alive at Shane Gamer. Like, it's going to be eating at him, not just for how things went last year, but just also Lane Kiffin being such a troll and stuff. So I don't know. Ole Miss, we'll see if they are going to be pretty good this year. I think they'll be right in the mix of things. Maybe not playoff, but I think South Carolina has got a lot to prove, and this is the game I think they actually turn the corner and really prove that they're for real.
We'll check back in with you on that prediction come July,
Please
August.
do. Yeah.
We'll check back in. Don't worry, this will not be the last time we talk about it. It's not a one and done situation where we talk about it now and don't bring it up until the game happens. We'll see what happens with the Ole Miss South Carolina game. That's one of the most anticipated games on the schedule. I think not just for the team, for the fans as well. People are going to be looking forward to that one, and it is on November 1st, once again, in Oxford, Mississippi. The one thing that I will say about Ole Miss's stadium, and I have never seen it in a game situation, but my brother went to law school at Ole Miss, so I've been to Oxford a few times, was there for his graduation. It's not as big as you would think. Not to say it doesn't get loud, not to say that the fans aren't into, I mean, they are. Obviously, that's an incredible fan base. They love Ole Miss, but it's not as big as you would think it would be for an SEC school. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, it's not like that's going to make or break, much of anything, but it is true. Like, it's not nearly as big as I thought it would be when I saw it. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm hoping to make it down for that game. Obviously, when it's a sold out stadium and you're playing an SEC opponent, I'm sure it does get nice and loud. But maybe compared to a couple of these other road environments that South Carolina will have already gone to leading up to this game, that could be good preparation for playing a team like Ole Miss. All right, next up on the road, once again, South Carolina is going to head down to Texas. They're going to take on Texas A&M. This is on November 15th.
And this comes after the second bye week. And I don't know. I think you're going to end up – here's the thing. I think you end up splitting these road games that you have back to back, if you will. I know the bye week's mixed in. But, I mean, you go to Ole Miss and then you fly out to Texas. Like, that's – I think you've never had success at Kyle Field for whatever reason, like the 12th man, all that stuff. A&M, they lost this game in Columbia, and they got the field was stormed and all that. I think A&M wins this game. I think going to Kyle Field, the 12th man, it's such a tough place to play. And we talk about beating the A&M curse and stuff, but like you haven't beat them in their own place yet. So until they can handle that environment and win at Kyle Field, I'm picking the Aggies, and I think this is definitely a game that is going to be one that's going to be tough to win for sure.
All right, next up, back at home, South Carolina finishes out the season 2 games at home, and both against in-state opponents. The first one on November 22nd, and it is Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you should win this game. I don't think there's really a ton to be said. I mean, look, the Sun Belt is a decent little conference and all that. Some good teams in there. Coastal, I think, is they're coming off a 6-7 season. I think South Carolina should really have no issue in this game. I know it's a Sun Belt team and all that. It's a little bit bigger than playing like an SC State at the beginning of the year. But if South Carolina is projected the way I think they're going to be, then it's like, all right, they should be able to handle business in this game and pick up that 9th win of the year.
All right, last game in the regular season for the Gamecocks, of course, is against the Clemson Tigers. This one is at home. South Carolina obviously wants it bad every year, but it needs to happen at Williams-Brice Stadium. It needs to happen at Williams-Brice Stadium, and you got to hope this is the year.
You gotta hope this is the year. Like, it's been so long since South Carolina has beaten Clemson at Willie B. Like, we talk about how long it took for them to win against Clemson in general. Like, it took until 3 years ago to do so in 2022. Well, I mean, they did that on the road in Death Valley. They did it again this past year in Death Valley. I think South Carolina is going to be able to get the job done here. I think this is going to be a pseudo playoff game, if you will, a game that puts you right in the thick of things. And for Clemson, even if they were to lose this game, I still think they're going to be right in the thick of things for the ACC and potentially going to the ACC championship and making their own path in to potentially win the conference championship. For South Carolina, if you want to get into the playoff, you need to win this game. Leave no doubt you're 10-2. I think they get the win, and this will be their first win in Columbia against Clemson since like 2013. It's been so long. So give me South Carolina to finish the regular season 10-2. And I think, unless my data points aren't adding up, I think that's enough to make the playoff.
So you have South Carolina at 10-2.
For right now, yes.
For
right now. Again, those road games are the trickiest things
to
pick. And then it's always like that Alabama game. You could easily be 8-4. You also could be 10-2. So that's how I see it.
Okay. All right. Well, our way too early season predictions for 2025. Jack, before I ask you the last few questions here on the show, let's give a shout out to our next sponsor.
Yep. Let's talk about our good friends over at Prize Picks. So perfect timing to talk about these guys because, look, the Super Bowl is coming up and there's a lot of money to be had. So Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It is just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I love using Prize Picks. It's a lot of fun getting involved in the game. As I mentioned, there is the Super Bowl going on this weekend. A lot of great players to pick from. You got Patrick Mahomes at more than half a passing yard. That is a great discount to go with. But you also have the NBA, college basketball, NBA, or NHL. I mean, you name it, they got it. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app and use the code on screen GC, that stands for Gamecocks Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups.
Hey, we always love, a shout out like this. Like and subscribe. Yes,
Please
we appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, Jack, a couple more questions before we finish here today. When we look at that schedule for South Carolina, do you like how it balances out for the Gamecocks? We talk about kind of that beginning, you hope if you're South Carolina, you're kind of able to roll through those first 5 games. Then from there, it starts to get a little bit harder. So how do you feel about the way this is laid out for the Gamecocks?
It's definitely tougher at the back half, no doubt about it. Those games against Bama, Ole Miss, and A&M, honestly, you can mix in LSU and Oklahoma too. That month-and-a-half stretch will definitely dictate the way in which your season goes. You will either go potentially to the playoffs or you're going to be sitting at home with maybe 3 to 4 losses just from those games alone. But I think the schedule works out in South Carolina's favor to where they should be at worst 4-1, at best 5-0 through the first month of the year. I think you're going to beat Tech, SC State, and Vanderbilt. It's just Missouri's a toss-up in my opinion, and Kentucky. I know what I said before about South Carolina should beat Kentucky here, but you never know. You never know what can happen. Kentucky could just end up being one of those dark horse teams, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So early on, I think the schedule allows you to really figure things out, see what you got, let Lenore Sellers and Mike Shula kind of develop for the first portion of the season. And then I think, once you get into October, it really picks up. The good thing is, and this is brought up by R.L. Smith, South Carolina usually gets better as the season goes on, as we've seen in all of Shane Beamer's time in Columbia. So I expect that to be the case again this year, but it definitely does help that the schedule is seemingly a little bit lighter at the beginning of the season.
All right. Well, we are just getting started talking about South Carolina's 2025 football season. We'll have a lot more of these episodes on GC Live coming up through spring as we go through spring practice, talking about players, positions, what to expect from South Carolina, where the Gamecocks are out in terms of recruiting. We're going to talk about that all here on GC Live. We're going to talk about everything else as well, baseball, basketball, you name it. We love to talk about it here on the show. And we appreciate all of you tuning in to watch us every single Wednesday. We've got shows, though, all week long on Gamecock Central's YouTube channel. We're on all of the social media platforms, so be sure to follow us at Gamecock Central and then check out GamecockCentral.com for all of the latest on South Carolina athletics. Jack, I think that does it for us here today on the show. Appreciate your insight as always. Appreciate all of you for watching. So have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, everybody. For Jack Veltri, I'm Kendall Smith. This has been GC Live here on Gamecock Central. We'll see you soon.